Hello, welcome to this week's review on My Hero Academia. This week I'm reviewing the episode It's a Small World. Rather brave of them to invoke the spirit of Walt Disney, but hey ho, we move on and kick off this review as we always do with these reviews by talking about the positives. And the headline positives for this review is that I liked the fact that the animation in this episode was consistent throughout. I think that it balances all the plot threads well. It makes a fine attempt at rounding off certain characters, and I like the nod to the past movies. Now, it's going to sound like damning with faint praise when I say this, but I like how consistent the animation was throughout this episode. Yeah, damning with faint praise in the most extremist, but what I will say is that one of the big issues I've had with this year's season is the fact that the animation can swing from being rather standard for television animation, regardless of whether that is anime or anything else for that matter, to being fantastic and brilliant looking, then to swinging around to just being about above average, and then just swinging and flicking between them as an episode goes by, or from one episode to the other. This is not like a couple of seasons back where, yes, the animation wasn't as good as maybe some of its contemporaries, but at least the animation quality was consistent all the way throughout. Sure, in terms of the main quality of the episodes, they're still good and still brilliant to watch, but it's that flicking and switching between these different standards of quality that makes certain episodes rather jarring to watch. Like, I'm fine with it being jarring to watch if there's a stylistic difference, and if that stylistic difference is intentional to make something that's jarring, but more often than not, that's simply not the case. But you know what, this week that wasn't the case. While this is not the best animated episode pound for pound this season, I still think I respect the fact the quality never really drops. And if it does drop, it isn't that stark. This adds to a sense of, well, just quality to everything that we're seeing, to the look and feel of everything, particularly when we get to the latter half of this episode, when we start getting to the dying embers of everything that's going on around here. Yes, the animation isn't fantastic from start to finish. I think the opening scene where we get the reprisal of the post-credit sequence from last week's episode, which was more or less shot for shot with a nominal amount of extra information thrown in, on itself is an odd choice for me. I think the animation there is not the best, but I think it is good, but from that point on things start to pick up. Arguably the battle to liberate Giganta is more or less on the same level too, maybe a bit slightly below that. But I feel that, if I'm being brutally honest with you, dear listener, I was expecting a lot more from that sequence of events, so it kind of biases me in a certain regard. To be fair, it is still a good scene, it's still a good sequence of events. I feel it is well written and the drama therein is solid, though I do have to say that more could have been done with the heroes and the cast members that are present within that scene. Mount Lady's little speech, monologue, internal monologue that she has, where she conveys this desire to be a better, more inspirational hero than what she's done before, is good. Mina's survivor guilt over, well, everything is great too. It shows a depth to her character that we haven't really seen that much of, apart from odd spurts here and there. I will have to say that her prior history with Giganta is oddly absent when she's having these flashbacks and these recollections of her journey thus far. Regardless, however, that's still stuff that motivates her actions. Kirishima, I feel, doesn't quite get the grand rounding off of his character that he really should do in this sequence of events. He has a connection to both Mina and Giganta. When the three of them are involved in this scene, I expected more. When the last time the three of them were involved in a scene, I lamented the fact that Kirishima, for want of the better phrase, got the win, and it should have been Mina, given what we know about her connection with Giganta. This time it's kind of the opposite, where she gets something of a win, she gets something of closure when it comes to her storyline with that character. But with Kirishima, he just doesn't really get much of anything, which is a shame. But hey, the muck man from the start of the entire series is dead now, so neat. I mean, it was cool to see them come back, but as far as the Grand Rogues gallery of characters from this series is concerned, I don't really think we ever really need to see the muck man coming back, but whatever. Look, I'm not going to go through the full series of plot threads in this episode. You know the episode, you've seen it, you understand it. Let me know if you have any that stick out to you for one reason or another. But I will say that it is remarkable that despite just how much is happening in this episode, it is all well balanced and well paced out. Even the post-credit sequence now bolting onto the start of this episode is still well paced and connected well with everything else within the episode itself. There is an argument, of course, that can be made that certain elements of this episode should have been longer or had entire episodes dedicated to them, but as is the case with reviewing in general, I like to play the ball where it lies than go too far into hypotheticals how I would have done thing territory. The whole thing about reprising the ending of the last episode, the post-credit sequence from the last episode, to put it at the start of this one, whilst I do think it's well handled as far as its placement in the broader construction of this episode, there is still a part of me that feels it doesn't really add anything to this episode itself. Particularly when you bear in mind that this sheer, seemingly endless swarm, this sea of clones, just disappears by the end of the episode, and they're not really referenced at all, despite the epic battle that's happening therein within this area. Another thing that I'm a little bit here and there on, not quite a negative, but still something I'm a little bit, we'll say, dubious on, is whole thing of Giganta's abandonment issues. Like, it's an odd twist, it's an interesting one, but I'm not sure if I like it. And there's a part of me that can't help but think that maybe when it came to plotting out this series of events, that the writer maybe had second thoughts on it. Maybe they were worried that if he was to be controlled by one of the heroes, that it would be them controlling them against their will, and that might be seen as being a bad thing, or a negative thing, or an unpleasant thing in some regard. Because it would be effectively making one character fight against their will. Well, it wouldn't be effective, it'd be literally making someone fight against their will, possibly to the death against someone else, which, I could see why if that would be the case, that'd be the motivation of it. Alternatively, it also feels like this could have happened because they wanted a yardstick to show just how powerful All For One is now. However, I think that's a weird idea in itself, because he's the big bad of this entire series. We know how absurdly powerful he is. Do we really need a sacrificial lamb to show just how powerful he is in this moment, particularly bearing in mind we just had a short speech from him talking about how the fact that now his body's getting younger, he's starting to become more powerful, even if he's starting to lose control of the vast library of quirks that he has within him. And a slight side point to that, I thought that All For One was hundreds of years old, so how the hell has it got so young so quickly? I suppose they do explain it away by saying that every time he's damaged, every time he's hurt, it speeds up the re-euthanization process a little bit more. Which is an interesting way of explaining it, a decent grasp of things. I'm not sure exactly how that would really work. Well, you can't really bring logic or science into all of this, but it's an odd twist. It feels as though, again, that this is something that's been a little bit rushed through, but hey ho, we'll see where all that kind of stuff goes. A slight side note to all of this is that I really do like the nods to the movie characters that we get in this episode. As the news reporter is giving their big speech, we get shots of various characters that we've seen thus far this series, some minor ones, some major ones, all watching the footage of the gentle criminal trying his best to stop the big Colosseum thing falling into the ocean, as well as other footage. And amongst that, we get a variety of generic characters, and we also get appearances from various different characters from the films that we've had up until this point, which I think is a cute little nod. I can imagine there's a lot of people now just trying to figure out where all the continuity of those movies fits into all of this, even more so than before. Like, hey, they're all canon now to some degree or another, so there we go. Even if some finer details aren't there, it's fine. It's a fine sequence of events. There was a part of me that did wonder if one of the people there was Knuckle Duster, but I don't think it was. If it was, then there might be a bit of a continuity error there as far as the way that it were designed, but still, I liked that. It does show this full scale of all of it, though you do have that weird shot where you got the two kids watching the footage, and someone mentions about something along the lines of, "Oh boy, why is All Might in Tokyo? Well, I think he comes from Japan or something." Look, if you're a big fan of that guy, you're going to know what country he comes from, for Christ's sake. But in any case, before we get into the negatives, I will have to say that I found the way that this episode ends to be effective. The whole final sequence feels like the great culmination of disaster upon disaster. Our heroes are acting in very desperate ways to prevent a dark inevitability. We get these sequence with Mineta, that little perv goblin, trying his best to plead with All For One to not take the power of one of his classmates, because he knows if he does that, oh boy, shit's going to get real, and he's trying to use whatever tactics he can do to do that by saying, "Oh, don't take his power because it'll make you look like an edgelord. Take my power because it'll give you a cool haircut." I could, given the way certain people have felt towards the Peach joke that Lemillion did a few weeks back, I'm curious to see how certain people felt about this one, because again, it's the kind of sheer desperation that I like. This character knows he can't defeat this villain on his own, so he's trying to reason with him, and he's trying to manipulate and get one over on him. A kind of plot thread and hero strategy that we don't see in this series, just full stop, which is something I find weird. But hey, this is coming off having watched the recent series of Doctor Who, and the Doctor himself always tries to empathise and rationalise and get into the head of the people he's with, and that's always been an aspect that I've liked within characters and superheroes and fictional characters. The absence of that in this series is a whole other thing, but I like that sheer desperation of, oh, don't steal his power, it'll make you look like a twat. Steal my power, it'll make you look cool, even if it's not that good. However, I have to say is that whilst I do like the image, this sheer field of destruction, the desperation, the darkness that's swifting and whizzing its way around all of this, there's still this feeling that, well, we know where we are right now. We know the landscape of this series up until this point, or rather this season up until this point, and you know that in the next episode the script is going to get flipped again, and then the episode after that it's going to get flipped. As soon as one side looks like they're peeking ahead, something comes along to then immediately undermine that in the next episode or within the same episode, which is infuriating, and is something I will reflect upon when we get into our season-long review, providing, of course, I remember to put it in, even though I've started to write it. So, regardless of what may or may not be happening next week, you know that whatever's happening here, there's going to be something that's going to ultimately end up readdressing the balance, even if it's only temporary. Which is a disappointment, because just the sheer level of chaotic destruction that we see here makes for an arresting image. Just how horrible and twisted and nasty things are getting in this moment. Of course, one way to get around that would be them to do an episode next week, which is focused on other characters in a different part, so that at least you can pull that out a little bit more, rather than immediately pivoting into the sequence of events which will ultimately end up resolving this current nightmare, or at least diminish this current nightmare. Whether or not that will be the case next week, I'm not 100% sure. I have seen bits of the trailer for next week, because I've started to do thumbnails for these again, because for reasons that I might go into in another time. With that said, however, whilst we have a slight hint of negativity in the air, I think it's time to talk about the negatives. I'm going to be blunt. I think that the liberation of Giganta was rushed. That whole affair feels like it really could have been its whole episode, and just allow each of the component parts within it to have a moment to shine, have a moment where we really get into their character, round them off, give their storylines time to breathe, give them a moment to really give us a chance to round these characters off, so that whatever may happen next to them can happen in a way which feels like the culmination of something, where it is the final culmination of their character and their character arc, or at least something in the meantime. I think that would have been better. We don't end up getting that. We have three characters here who ultimately are connected to one another in some regard, some shape or form, but we don't really get any closure on any of them, really. We do get to a certain degree with Mina, for what that is worth, but even then, the motivation of it just feels a little bit off. This isn't her getting one over on the character because of their personal trauma with that character. It's just more of a general sense of, I'm going to be a hero, which is good, but it does feel like it's missing that personal connection with her. Kirishima just... He's just kind of there. He has the least amount of emotional impact in this episode. Giganta's stuff, he's not going to have much of an emotional connection to either of those other characters, but at the very least, we do get his abandonment issues coming to the fore in the latter half of this episode, which, whilst I'm still of two minds about it, at least shows some kind of emotional weight behind the character, even if there is a part of it that does feel like it's coming out of left field. What we end up getting is three characters that don't feel as though they get much closure. Well, one gets closure in the sense that she gets a chance to try and get some kind of comeback on a character that's traumatized her in the past, and Giganta might well be dead at this point, so you can't get much more definitive closure from that, but still, it does end up giving this sense of, there could have been more here. Like, this whole siege, this whole sequence of events itself could have easily been an episode or an episode and a half, like the stuff that we ended up getting with the hospital a couple of weeks back. It's a shame that this is the way that things have panned out, this is the way that things have unfolded, but that's just the weight of this season. There's a lot of stuff which feels as though it could have been an episode or two longer. With that also said, the whole thing with, I forget his name, the Purpleman guy, the guy that when you answer a question from him, he gets control you. Yeah, he just feels like he's there for the sake of being a means to an end. Given the character, given their backstory, given who they are and what we know of them. The fact that they are just effectively just relegated to, alright, we want you to say a thing now, just feels odd to me. They're probably one of the characters, one of the side characters with the greatest potential to be a mainline character, but here and now they're just on the sidelines, so just this periphery character. Maybe it is because their power is just so overpowered that, yeah, you can't really crack that out too frequently, but even still, I think that more could have been done with them. Their job in this episode is to just get jumped by the Monkman, and that's just about it. They get jumped by the Monkman, and then they use their power to trick Giganta into defeating the guys that are trying to save him, and then Giganta breaks free and just attacks All For One anyway because he has abandonment issues, which, I don't know, I think there's a lot of stuff that could have been handled better here. It feels like there's certain plot threads. Hey, maybe the whole stuff with Giganta would have felt a little bit more had his character been developed, even if it was that anime thing of we'll only give the backstory just before they die things. With all that said, let's get into the overview and say that this is still a solid and good episode in and of itself. What I will say is that, however, that it does feel as though there's certain elements which are in some regards kind of redundant, in other regards just kind of need a little more time to cook. The extended post-credit sequence from last week being at the start of this episode, whilst it is handled fine enough, I still think it wasn't necessary. Either it should just have remained a post-credit sequence things for last week, or it should have just been an outright part of this episode thereafter. Aside from that, I think the episode is still good. I think that the stakes have been risen to a great degree, but I know how this season works, so it doesn't really matter just how desperate things become, because you know that inevitably something's going to come out the pipework, something that's going to come over the horizon to flip the balance, and then something will come to flip that balance again and again and again. It's like watching two crocodiles fighting, they're just constantly flipping around one another. With that said, however, let me know what you thought. Well, actually, no. We'll talk about what you thought about last week, as we're now going to Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner. Oh, look, it's the ghost of Walt Disney. It's time for Comment Corner to talk about the comments from last week's episode, or your thoughts and feelings about that one. We kick off, as we almost always do, with Big X1, who said, I like this week's episode. This is, of course, referring to last week's episode. Not as much as last week's, which, of course, the week before that. I missed the post-credit thing, so I had to go back and rewatch it. I think it should have been part of the episode or in a different one. It feels weird to cut it out like that. Thank you for your comment. And yeah, I think it could have easily been part of this week's episode or part of the mainline episode itself. It didn't need to be a post-credit thing because it didn't really change much. It's not recontextualised anything. I mean, just think about any post-credit sequence in any film series. Not even just the MCU stuff, just any... It's always stuff that's either like an ending gag, a nod to something darker coming down for the sequel, or just a sequel tease. This week, or rather last week, we didn't really get that. It's just, oh, Toga can't use the quirks of other people that she doesn't like, or she likes, but she can't, but whatever. Just whatever. It didn't really matter, end up materialising itself too much. With that said, let us get on to the next comment, which comes from Scott TV Gamer, who says, to me, this episode was just okay. When you're someone who's already familiar with the content being adapted, how it's adapted is what you're going to be judging most. And this is an episode that could have been much better. Glad anime-only viewers like it. The next episode has the potential to have a very special moment that I'm looking forward to. Thank you for your comment, and yes, I get that feeling when it comes to how certain things are adapted and how that's handled. I think that was a major stopping point where I didn't watch the second Kick-Ass movie, apart from the fact I didn't really like the second Kick-Ass graphic novel series, but hey, that's a whole other discussion for a whole other time. Though I get the feeling that the big epic moment they're referring to is going to be coming next week, but we'll see about all of that. With that said, thank you for your comments. Let me know what you thought about this week's episode down in the comment section down below, and you will be writing next week's review. Thank you all, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!